Alex had always taken pride in the home he and his father built together. It wasn't just a house, it was a symbol of everything they'd achieved as a family. He still remembered the day they first laid the foundation. Alex was 17, his hands blistered from handling rough wood and hauling cement. It was his father's dream to have a home they could call their own, and weekends that could have been spent with friends were instead spent hammering nails, mixing concrete, and painting walls. It wasn't always fun, but the laughter they shared and the lessons he learned while working alongside his dad made every moment feel worthwhile. As the years went by, the house became a part of him. He remembered how proud his father was when they finally moved in. Alex was only 20 at the time, and they'd toasted with cheap beer on the porch, looking out over the yard they planned to landscape someday. That day never came, but the yard didn't matter. What mattered was the connection they'd built, not just with the house, but with each other. Alex never expected that connection to be so easily discarded. It all started innocuously enough. His father had remarried 2 years ago, to a woman named Linda. She was charming at first, always baking cookies, complimenting Alex on his work ethic, and talking about how lucky they all were to have each other. But as time went on, cracks began to show. Linda didn't hide her annoyance when Alex came over for family dinners, often sighing loudly or hinting that adults need their space. When Alex's father retired early, Linda became even more controlling, insisting they spend their free time traveling to make up for lost years. Alex wasn't blind to what was happening, but he bit his tongue. His father seemed happy, and that was enough for him. Or at least, he thought it was. One crisp autumn afternoon, Alex was visiting the house, helping his father clear out the garage. He'd noticed a lot of boxes stacked against the walls, many of them sealed with fresh tape. It wasn't unusual, his father was a bit of a pack rat, but something about it felt different. When Alex asked what was going on, his father hesitated, then casually said, "Oh, we're just downsizing. Linda and I are planning to move." The words hung in the air like a sharp slap. Alex laughed nervously, certain he'd misunderstood. "Move? What do you mean? Where are you going?" "I got—" His father didn't look him in the eye. Instead, he focused on tightening the lid of a jar he'd found. "Linda and I found a place upstate. It's a vacation home, really, but we figured it's time for a change." Alex's stomach twisted. "What about this house? The house we built?" His voice rose despite his efforts to stay calm. "You can't just leave it." His father sighed, finally meeting Alex's gaze. "We've already found a buyer. Look, Alex, I know this house means a lot to you, but Linda and I need something that fits our lifestyle. This place is too big for us now." "Too big?" Alex repeated, incredulous. He gestured around the garage, where tools and memories were stacked side by side. "Dad, we spent years building this place. It's not just a house, it's part of our family. How can you sell it like it's nothing?" Oh. His father's expression hardened. "It's not nothing, Alex. But things change. You're grown now. You've got your own life. This house served its purpose, but we need to think about the future." Alex's heart pounded in his chest. "And what about my future? You know how much time and effort I put into this place. This was supposed to be ours. You promised—" "I didn't promise anything," his father interrupted, his tone sharp. "You helped because you wanted to. I didn't force you." The words stung more than Alex thought possible. He took a step back, struggling to process what he'd just heard. All those years of sweat and sacrifice, all those nights he'd stayed up late patching walls or fixing leaks. Had it all been for nothing? "Does Linda know?" Alex asked, his voice quieter now. "Does she know how much I put into this place?" "She doesn't need to know," his father replied. "This is my house, Alex. I appreciate everything you've done, but it's time to move on." Alex stared at him, unable to believe the words coming out of his father's mouth. He wanted to scream, to argue, to make him see reason, but the look on his father's face told him it was useless. The decision had been made. He left the garage without another word, walking out into the crisp autumn air. The leaves crunched under his boots as he made his way to his car, his mind racing. He couldn't believe what had just happened. The house he'd poured his heart into, the home that was supposed to be his legacy, was being sold off like a piece of old furniture. For the next few days, Alex couldn't think about anything else. He tried to focus on work, on friends, on anything that would distract him, but the betrayal gnawed at him constantly. Every time he closed his eyes, he saw the look on his father's face, the indifference, the dismissal, as if none of it had ever mattered. As if he started avoiding his father's calls, unable to face him without feeling a surge of anger and disappointment. Linda, of course, was ecstatic about the move, posting pictures of their new vacation home online with captions like, "Finally living the dream." It made Alex sick to his stomach. But what hurt the most was the silence from his father. No apology, no explanation, just silence. One night, as Alex sat alone in his apartment, he found himself scrolling through old photos on his phone. There were pictures of the house during its construction, Alex covered in sawdust, his father grinning with a hammer in hand, the two of them posing in front of the freshly painted walls. He felt a lump rise in his throat. How had it all gone so wrong? He thought about calling his father, demanding answers, but what was the point? The house was already sold. The buyers were probably picking out curtains and planning renovations. It was over. Or was it? A thought began to form in Alex's mind, a small flicker of hope amidst the anger and despair. He didn't know what he could do yet, but one thing was certain, he wasn't ready to give up. Not yet. If his father wouldn't fight for their legacy, then Alex would. The first few weeks after learning about the sale of the house were a blur for Alex. Every time he tried to distract himself, the betrayal pulled him back like an anchor. He couldn't escape the memories of everything he'd given to that house. It wasn't just the physical labor, though there had been plenty of that. It was the emotional weight he had carried, the pride he had felt in knowing he had helped build something lasting. Now, it seemed, none of that mattered. Linda, predictably, had taken over the narrative. Her social media posts became increasingly difficult to ignore. Pictures of her posing in front of their soon-to-be vacation home, captions filled with hashtags like New Beginnings and Dream Life. Alex had never hated her, but with every new post his resentment grew. She had swooped into their family, turned his father against him, and now she was reaping the rewards of his sacrifices. Alex couldn't help but think back to all the moments he had put aside his own needs for the sake of the house. When his friends were going to college parties or taking road trips, he was helping his dad build a deck. When he could have saved up for his own apartment, he instead spent money on supplies to finish the basement. Even after the house was finished, he was the one who came over to fix the leaky roof or repaint the porch when it started to chip. He remembered one winter in particular when a massive storm had caused a branch to crash through the living room window. His dad had called him in a panic, and Alex had driven through the snow to help board it up. They spent the entire night working, huddled under blankets to keep warm until the glass company could come the next day. At the time, Alex hadn't minded. It was their house, and it felt right to take care of it together. Now, looking back, he wondered if his father had ever appreciated any of it. The realization that his efforts had been taken for granted was like a punch to the gut. Every time he thought about the house, he felt a mix of anger, sadness, and helplessness. He tried talking to friends about it, but they didn't seem to understand. "It's just a house," one of them said. But it wasn't just a house. It was a piece of his life, a part of his identity. Losing it felt like losing a piece of himself. Despite his anger, Alex found himself driving past the house more often than he cared to admit. He would park a few houses down and just stare at it, watching as the leaves in the yard turned golden and red. He thought about all the years he had spent mowing that lawn, raking those leaves, and shoveling that driveway. He thought about the nights he and his dad had sat on the porch, talking about their plans for the future. One afternoon, as he sat in his car watching the house, he noticed a moving truck pull into the driveway. Two men in uniforms began unloading furniture, carrying it into the house with an ease that made Alex's chest tighten. They were erasing the last traces of his family's presence, filling the space with strangers' belongings. He wanted to storm out of the car, to yell at them to stop, but he knew it wouldn't make a difference. The house didn't belong to him anymore, not legally at least. Still, the sight of someone else claiming what he had helped build was almost too much to bear. That night, Alex decided to do something he hadn't done in years. He dug out an old box of photos from his closet, the one his mom had given him before she passed away. Inside were pictures of him and his dad working on the house, standing beside piles of lumber, grinning with paint rollers in hand, and one photo in particular caught his eye. It was a picture of him and his dad standing in the empty living room on the day they'd finished the floors. They were both covered in dust, their faces red from exertion, but they looked so proud. Alex remembered the exact moment the photo was taken. His dad had put an arm around his shoulder and said, "We did good, kid. This is going to be ours forever." Forever. The word echoed in Alex's mind as he stared at the photo. His father had meant those words at the time, he was sure of it. But somewhere along the way, something had changed. Maybe it was Linda. Maybe it was the passage of time. Maybe his father had simply stopped caring. Whatever the reason, Alex couldn't let it go. As the weeks passed, Alex began researching everything he could about the sale of the house. He combed through public records, trying to find out who had bought it and for how much. He even reached out to a real estate agent he knew, hoping to get more information. The more he learned, the more frustrated he became. The house had sold for far less than it was worth, a fact that only added to his sense of injustice. What bothered him even more was the realization that his father hadn't consulted him at all. He hadn't asked for his opinion, hadn't given him a chance to buy the house himself, hadn't even told him until the sale was practically finalized. It was as if his father had deliberately excluded him, erasing him. In his search for answers, Alex stumbled upon something that gave him pause. While reviewing the original documents from when the house was built, he noticed that his name was listed as a co-signer on the mortgage. At the time, it had been a necessity. His father's credit wasn't strong enough to secure a loan on his own, so Alex had agreed to co-sign. He hadn't thought much of it at the time, it was just a way to help out. But now, seeing his name on those documents sparked something in him. If he was a co-signer, didn't that mean he had some claim to the house? He wasn't sure, but the possibility was enough to reignite his determination. Alex spent the next few days researching co-signer rights, reading legal articles and forums late into the night. He reached out to a lawyer friend, explaining the situation in as much detail as he could. The friend was sympathetic but cautious. "You might have a case," she said, "but it's going to be complicated. Are you sure you want to go down this road?" Alex didn't hesitate. "Yes," he said firmly. "I've already lost enough. I'm not losing this too." With his friend's help, Alex began the process of filing a legal claim to challenge the sale. It wasn't about the money, though that would help. It was about standing up for himself, for the years of hard work and dedication that had been so carelessly discarded. As he filled out the paperwork, Alex felt a sense of clarity he hadn't felt in weeks. This wasn't just about the house anymore. It was about reclaiming his voice, his agency, and his place in the story of his own life. Whatever the outcome, he knew one thing for certain: he wasn't going to let his sacrifices be erased without a fight. Alex's decision to challenge the sale of the house wasn't easy, but once it was made, there was no turning back. He spent sleepless nights poring over legal documents, conversations with his lawyer friend, and countless moments second-guessing himself. Was he being petty? Was he willing to risk further alienating his father for the sake of a house? But every time doubt crept in, Alex reminded himself of everything the house symbolized. It wasn't just four walls and a roof. It was a monument to years of hard work, a physical embodiment of the bond he once had with his father. It represented more than a home. It was his history. Letting it go would mean letting go of everything he had fought to build. Alex's lawyer friend, Danielle, was both supportive and cautious. She had seen cases like this before, where family disputes over property turned ugly. "You need to prepare yourself," she warned him during one of their late-night strategy sessions. "This isn't just about finding a loophole. Once you start this process, it's going to stir up a lot of emotions, for you and your dad. Are you ready for that?" Alex nodded, though he wasn't entirely sure. "It's not just about me," he said, his voice steady. "It's about what's right. My dad can't just erase me from this house's history like I was never part of it." Danielle explained the steps they needed to take. First, they'd file a claim with the court to halt the sale of the property. Given Alex's name was on the original mortgage documents as a co-signer, there was a strong argument that he had a partial claim to the property's equity. The court would need to review the sale and determine whether it was legitimate or if Alex had been wrongfully excluded. "It's not going to be quick," Danielle said, "and it's not going to be easy. But you have a case, Alex. You just have to be prepared for a fight." The first hurdle came almost immediately. When Alex's father received notice of the claim, he called Alex in a fury. It was the first time they'd spoken since their argument in the garage, and the conversation quickly spiraled into a shouting match. "How could you do this?" his father demanded, his voice crackling through the phone. "Do you have any idea what you're doing? You're trying to ruin everything." "I'm not ruining anything," Alex shot back. "You're the one who sold the house without even telling me. Do you have any idea how much that place meant to me? To us?" His father's tone turned cold. "This isn't about you, Alex. It's my house. I built it. I paid for it. You helped, sure, but that doesn't give you the right to claim ownership." Alex felt his jaw tighten. "It's not just about ownership, Dad. It's about respect. You didn't even give me a chance to be part of the decision. You didn't even tell me until it was too late." The conversation ended with his father hanging up, leaving Alex seething. He wanted to believe that his father would come around, that he'd realize how much this all meant to Alex, but deep down he knew better. Linda's influence was too strong, and his father was too stubborn. The next few weeks were a blur of legal filings and court dates. Danielle was a constant presence, guiding Alex through the complexities of the case. They gathered evidence to support his claim: old receipts for supplies he had paid for, photos of him working on the house, and even testimony from neighbors who remembered seeing him there every weekend. It wasn't just about proving that Alex had helped build the house. It was about showing that he had invested in it emotionally, financially, and physically. Danielle was confident that they had a strong case, but Alex couldn't shake the anxiety that followed him everywhere. Meanwhile, the tension with his father continued to grow. They didn't speak directly after that initial phone call, but Alex heard through family friends that his father was furious. Linda, of course, was feeding the fire. She had always been good at playing the victim, and now she had plenty of material to work with. "She's telling everyone you're trying to bankrupt them," one of Alex's cousins told him during a strained lunch. "She's saying you're doing this out of spite, that you're jealous of their new life." Alex clenched his fists under the table. "It's not about jealousy," he said through gritted teeth. "It's about fairness. I'm not going to let them erase me like I never mattered." The hardest part was dealing with the guilt. As much as Alex believed in what he was doing, he couldn't ignore the voice in the back of his mind that whispered accusations of selfishness. He thought about his mom, about how she had always been the peacemaker in their family. What would she think of all this? Would she? But then he'd remember the nights spent fixing broken pipes, the weekends lost to landscaping, the pride he had felt when they first moved in. Letting it go would mean letting all of that go too. He couldn't do it. Finally, after weeks of back-and-forth legal maneuvering, the case went before a judge. Alex sat in the courtroom, his heart pounding as Danielle presented their argument. She explained how Alex's name on the mortgage gave him partial ownership, how he had contributed both financially and physically to the house's construction and maintenance, and how his father had excluded him from the sale without proper notice. His father, sitting across the room with his own lawyer, looked furious. Linda sat beside him, her arms crossed and her lips pressed into a thin line. When his father took the stand, Alex barely recognized him. The man who had once worked beside him in the sweltering heat, laughing and joking as they built the house together, was now cold and defensive. He denied that Alex had contributed significantly to the house, insisting that his help had been minimal and voluntary. "That house is mine," his father said firmly. "I built it, I paid for it. Alex was just helping out like any son would. He doesn't have any claim to it." Alex felt his stomach drop. Hearing those words from his own father hurt more than he thought possible. But Danielle was ready. She presented receipts, photos, and even an old email from his father thanking Alex for covering the cost of a major repair. By the time the hearing ended, Alex felt emotionally drained. The judge didn't make an immediate decision, but Alex could tell that the evidence had made an impact. A week later, the decision came down. The court ruled that Alex did, in fact, have a partial claim to the house's equity. The sale could proceed, but Alex was entitled to a significant portion of the proceeds. It wasn't a perfect victory, but it was enough. Alex felt a mixture of relief and sadness as he processed the ruling. He had stood up for himself, for his contributions, and for the bond he once shared with his father. But the cost had been high, and he wasn't sure if their relationship could ever be repaired. As he walked out of the courthouse, Alex took a deep breath and looked up at the sky. For the first time in weeks, he felt a sense of clarity. The fight wasn't just about the house. It was about reclaiming his worth, his voice, and his place in his own story. No matter what happened next, he knew he had done the right thing. The days following the court's decision were a blur for Alex. On paper, he had won. The judge's ruling validated his contributions and entitled him to a significant portion of the proceeds from the sale of the house. But the victory felt hollow. His relationship with his father, already strained, was now fractured beyond recognition. The house that once symbolized their bond was gone, and the bitterness surrounding its loss threatened to overshadow everything it had once stood for. Alex wasn't sure how to feel. On one hand, he was relieved that his efforts hadn't been erased, that he had stood up for himself and succeeded in reclaiming what was rightfully his. On the other, he couldn't ignore the damage the battle had done. The memories of the courtroom, of his father denying his contributions, haunted him. He had spent so much time fighting to be acknowledged, but now he wondered if the cost had been too high. One day, as Alex sifted through boxes of old photos and keepsakes, he came across a dusty envelope. Inside was a letter from his mother, written years ago when she was sick but still hopeful. Her handwriting was neat but slightly shaky, and her words were filled with the warmth and wisdom he had always loved about her. "Alex, if you're reading this, it means life has thrown you one of its many curveballs. I want you to know that no matter what happens, you've always been my rock. You've always been the one who keeps this family grounded, even when things get tough. Remember that love is complicated. It's messy and imperfect, and sometimes it hurts more than it heals. But don't let anger or pride take over your heart. Find a way to forgive, even when it feels impossible. Find a way to move forward, not for anyone else, but for yourself. Love always." The letter brought tears to Alex's eyes. His mother had always been the peacemaker, the one who believed in finding common ground no matter how difficult the situation. Her words reminded him of what he had lost, not just the house, but the family it had once represented. That evening, Alex made a decision. He couldn't change the past, and he couldn't force his father to see things from his perspective, but he could try to rebuild, even if it meant being the one to take the first step. The next day, Alex called his father. The phone rang several times before going to voicemail, but Alex didn't give up. He left a message, his voice steady but sincere. "Dad, it's me. Look, I know things have been bad between us. I know you're angry, and honestly, so am I. But this fight, it's not who we are. I don't want this to be the way things end between us. I'm willing to talk if you are. Just let me know." It took a week for his father to respond. When the call finally came, Alex's heart raced as he picked up the phone. "Alex," his father began, his voice gruff and hesitant. "I got your message." There was a long pause, and Alex could almost hear the weight of the words his father was struggling to find. "I don't know if I can forgive you for what you did," his father finally said, "but I don't want us to hate each other. That's not what your mom would have wanted." Alex swallowed hard, fighting back the lump in his throat. "I don't want us to hate each other either, Dad. I just want you to understand why I did what I did. It wasn't about money or revenge. It was about feeling like I mattered, like everything we built together mattered." His father sighed heavily. "I didn't mean to make you feel like you didn't matter, Alex. I guess I got so caught up in trying to move on, I didn't stop to think about what it would cost." They talked for nearly an hour, their conversation halting and awkward at times, but honest in a way they hadn't been with each other in years. They didn't resolve everything, not by a long shot. But it was a start. Over the next few months, Alex and his father worked to rebuild their relationship. It wasn't easy. There were still moments of tension, especially when Linda was involved, but they were both trying. Alex visited his father's new house for dinner one evening, and though the atmosphere was strained, it was a step in the right direction. As for the money Alex received from the sale, he decided to put it to good use. He found a modest fixer-upper in a nearby neighborhood and poured himself into renovating it. This time, it wasn't about proving anything to anyone else. It was about creating a space that was truly his own. The work was cathartic. As he painted walls, installed flooring, and landscaped the yard, he found himself letting go of some of the anger and resentment he had been carrying. The new house wasn't the same as the one he had grown up in, but it was a fresh start. It was a chance to build something new, something that was his alone. One afternoon, as Alex finished planting a tree in the front yard, his phone buzzed with a text from his father. It was a picture of the two of them, standing in front of their old house on the day it was finished. The caption read, "We did good, kid." Alex stared at the photo for a long time, a bittersweet smile tugging at his lips. He knew they still had a long way to go, but for the first time in a long time, he felt like they were moving in the right direction. Months later, as Alex sat on the porch of his new home, he thought about everything that had happened. The fight over the house had been painful, but it had also forced him to confront truths he had been avoiding for years. He had learned to stand up for himself, to value his own contributions, and to let go of the bitterness that had been weighing him down. Most importantly, he had learned that closure wasn't about winning or losing. It was about finding peace, even in the messiest of situations. And as he looked out at the tree he had planted, its leaves rustling in the evening breeze, Alex finally felt that peace. It wasn't perfect, but it was enough.